Сегодня речь у нас пойдет про GRC-системы. Ну, тема-то большая, сложная, да, поэтому...
Sorry guys, that was a long run. We are going to start my presentation on GRC for SAP. It's actually a major subject, you know. You can talk about it for days, really. And the people run trainings on that, for God's sake. But I'm going to tell about some key methodologies in respect of development of GRC systems for SAP. That's our agenda. We are going to describe the key types of GRC solutions available in the market. Next, we shall talk about development of a GRC system and what you need to do in order to have one without a major investment of money or efforts. So what is a GRC system and why would you need one? Let's imagine you work for a large corporation and your business leaders have spelled out a number of requirements. Interestingly, they want to make money, grow their business, and deliver on some financial and other targets. This is what governance is about. Obviously, in order to deliver on these objectives, we need to analyze the whole range of risks that exist for the company in the current situation. Different risks for different business processes. There is, by the way, another important tool that can help us minimize our spending, minimize our risks, and this is the compliance field, if you like. Well, compliance is very important because it essentially tells the manager why you need this or that and how you control for that. You need compliance in order to assure zero level of internal flaws in business processes that will get you liable under the existing regulations. Very simply put, you need governance to make money, and you need risk management and compliance to save money. If these processes perform reliably, no new risks arise, the company stays on the good side of the existing regulations and policies, the business should be okay, and if you set your targets correctly, you should see certain growth. Let's now talk about our market, about Russian corporations. Many Russian companies, even large ones, often lack the understanding and the organizational competences in order to develop a system like this. So, in order for them to deliver on their objectives, they only relied on a meager portion of GRC. They just think they need privilege control, distribution of rights and authority, as well as fraud prevention and fraud identification. Many Russian companies are also interested in automation of access control. That will obviously be linked to responsibility metrics. The GRC market is pretty large. In this market, You'll see some big guys like IBM, Oracle, or SAP, but also there will be other corporations. Some will be niche players. They usually develop laser-focused solutions. You do know that SAP is the most prevalent ERP system in Russia, so we shall be talking about SAP primarily. SAP once bought a company called Virsa, and they introduced or repackaged their products, calling them SAP GRC. The key components of SAP GRC include risk management, access control, process control, and fraud management. This fraud management module is the most difficult one. That's why, until recently, deployment of this module has led to huge waste of efforts. Well, with the new SAP base, which is mega hierarchical, they're trying to develop their fraud management tool. Access control module is the one that is most often used by companies. So a company that tries to implement a solution like that can either buy SAP GRC or can develop its own proprietary solution. Existing GRC solutions are quite expensive. Deployment can take 6 months to 3 years. And much really depends on who is going to do the deployment. And much will also depend on the governance principles and governance and level of your maturity in governance. Even the new solutions of SAP GRC, where they try to minimize manual work, be it the labor of IT people or analysts, the system still requires so much effort to set up the system and to set up all the peripherals, so to speak. It is a very complicated solution. In fact, you'll be hard-pressed to find good experts in deployment of such solutions and fine-tuning of such solutions to the needs of specific companies in Russia or even abroad. And then you will face the need to customize the system to a large extent, because internal structure is usually such that you need to introduce customization. Customization also takes a very long time. And many companies who are interested in these solutions, many integrators will either take too long or it will cost you a king's ransom. We actually know of many cases when these solutions just go unimplemented. Well, you can try developing your own proprietary solution. It will be small, but it will certainly reflect your actual requirements. This is what we're going to discuss in my lecture. Let's imagine that we have been tasked with development of such a GRC system. We start by analyzing the critical business processes that we need to cover with the GRC system. We should prioritize among different business processes in terms of criticality. If it's an end-to-end business process that links us, for example, to suppliers or clients, it will probably be quite critical. Then we decompose a given business process into a set of actions and workflows, and we develop a segregation of duty matrix. Then we develop essentially a map of overlaps. You do understand that overlaps of processes or functions at the level of individual employees can possibly create serious problems for the business if a person, for example, is not competent enough or it simply creates a fraudulent potential when people know several adjustment processes well enough to further their own needs at the expense of the company or its clients. A large corporation that could have been running SAP for several years usually has already developed a large set of roles and business functions that are no longer supported by SAP, which means that we first need to analyze all these roles and see how they connect to business actions and business processes. Usually, the majority of these business roles will be considered redundant and will need some cleaning. This is what we do at the next stage. A large production system usually has a wide spectrum of roles and a multitude of users. Over time, some roles will become obsolete, but their instances in the system will probably remain. And if we are about to transform the system, if we're about to implement GRC and move to a data center, for example, well then, it makes perfect sense for us to clean the system up. Okay, next we try to minimize the number of SOD violations. All the other stages are also shown on the screen. I think they're self-explanatory, really. After we have found this user set violates segregation of duties matrix, we need to take some of their rights away and after we have redesigned the roles, we need to control this role for any other changes, meaning that we need to make sure that you can only redesign a given role if you go through a specific set of actions and consultations. In large corporations, you can have thousands and thousands of users, and it's very important to automate this process if you can, because if your administrator does this work manually, it means that many users will have to wait until they're finally registered in the system. Okay, we shall be using terms like SAP transaction authorization objects and authorization. In fact, SAP authorization system is quite difficult because they have roles and profiles. They also have complex roles and profiles. So therefore, rights extension and access control will be a very complicated tree. Controlling individual transactions usually is much easier. You just define a given transaction that includes a number of actions, and then you control access to this transaction. That's much easier than other possible solutions, because SAP has a lot of functions built into it. So our business process is decomposed into business actions, and for each business action to go through, you will need usually several authorizations. When we have, say, 2 business actions, they will follow a certain sequence, and we shall then want to identify the people who have been authorized to perform these transactions. We're not starting from scratch. On the internet you can find lots of information on SOD matrices. You can actually find some SAP best practices there. In fact, we can refer to some of these documents, for example, to this Australian standard, which talks about critical actions for each and every SAP module. There is also the ISACA book, where, again, all these potential violations are described. So you're more than welcome to use it. If you have access to SAP, you can also browse SAP resources for similar matrices. I haven't been able to find them on time because most of the links will refer you to SAP Marketplace, so you can get them there as long as you are a registered user and client of SAP. Which is a bad idea, because this means that regular users cannot get them. You should only be able to get them if you have been subscribed to SAP GRC. But you can actually find lots of data on SAP forums. Okay, let's look at specific modules such as SAP MM, which is materials management. And this is a module where fraud usually is quite prevalent when you do goods receiving, when you do storage, when you do planning or inventory management. Shown here are some of the key functions, right? This is the whole procurement cycle. Each of these business processes is decomposed into a set of business actions. You can have, for example, a request for certain materials, or you can have a request for a certain asset. Next, you get a confirmation, you get a bill, or rather, you get you first initiate a tender, then you select a bidder, and then you get a bill. Actually, there are many actions there that can be considered critical. For example, instead of a trusted vendor, your employee can actually connect some affiliated business to the system and buy the stuff they need from them. Well, that way you will be able to steal loads of money from the company in a pretty legitimate manner. Well, in some cases, you do the payment by, say, a bank wire, and then you will need to export data from SAP to 1C, which is a Russian accounting system. But in some cases, you use the SAP system itself to wire the money. And when the money has already left the company, it's difficult to return it. So what can we do? Well, we can identify a range of actions. learn what kind of roles are used for a specific transaction. In this previous slide, for example, we identified a given transaction that was a purchase order creation. This is a critical transaction, obviously, so now we shall look for roles that encompass this particular transaction. In order to do that, you can use, for example, the standard functionality of SAP, and then you can export it all to Excel. Then we can look at our business processes to learn who has the right to create these purchase orders, who will then confirm and approve them. And again, we make sure that there are no overlaps there. Well, this matrix, for example, shows a gross violation of SOD when you create a purchase order and you also select a vendor. Well, this is a standard SAP MM transaction. We can have several thousands transactions like this. But in order to decrease your risks in about 80% of cases, you only need to process about several hundred transactions. So you can do this work manually. Well, next we shall try to find roles that overlap in our existing segregation of duties matrix. Quite often we can find old roles that run in violation of our SOD matrix. And again, we use built-in functionality to do that. And then we can actually analyze this list of users that for some reason have extra large range of rates available to them. However, SAP Standards Report does not provide you with all the information. For example, if you find a list of these users that have way too many rights and they are effectively in violation of our SOD matrix, you would certainly like to learn how come they have all these rights. SAP will not tell you that, or you will need to manually look into personal files for each of the users, and if you're looking at information on, say, several thousand users, it's going to be a hell of an effort. But if you're using MaxPatrol, MaxPatrol contains this out-of-the-box functionality. It can help you analyze roles and the way these roles were acquired. So it will support some basic analysis in this respect. You can also use some standard MaxPatrol mechanisms to double-check that the roles don't change and the users don't get some extra roles and privileges. This is an example of role control. Well, here we get a list of roles, and we see which role was created when and by whom, and what kind of inventory elements it consists of. Well, quite often, this will be enough for you to control what's happening in the system. Same actually goes for authorization profiles. You can also control when they were created, what they are composed of, and what kind of authorizations they contain. I should have also mentioned that it also contains information on users who have this role and this profile. Well, this won't be enough for a full-fledged GRC system, so we are trying to improve our solutions to enable our clients or our potential clients in developing a mini GRC system. Well, in the near future, you will be able to create customer business actions, map roles to business actions, automatically find matches of roles and business action rules, and then pretty much automate your controls. So you see, it should also support checking of usage of roles and transactions. I will return to it later with your permission. Control of administrative rights and privileges is another important function here. This is in fact a separate standalone pain in the neck as far as GRC systems are concerned. Besides violations of business rules and business processes, you also need to control distribution of admin privileges to make sure people don't get too many of this. I've seen systems where companies would have over several hundred super users. What's the use of implementing a segregation of duties and authority matrix? Well, first, it helps us delineate, segregate the functions of different individuals, say in SAP MM. SAP is a very flexible solution. In SAP, for example, you can make a one-off payment to a vendor. And this is a standalone mechanism. It's not usually covered by SOD. You can actually bypass your whole existing business process and execute a payment real quick if it's needed. This is the OTV mechanism. So this functionality should be available to the administrator. In some cases, it will also be available to a number of users. So when you do use this mechanism, you go through a fast track, so you won't see any violations of the SOD matrix. So you need to control for it. You should either block it, or you should have reports that will tell you if anyone has actually used this functionality, and do it on a regular basis. So these OTV payments exist outside the SOD metrics, and please remember that in pretty much every business module of SAP you can find something like that. Something that is essentially an emergency measure, an emergency functionality that can help you bypass an existing segregation of duties matrix. It can easily happen that your finance people or even your IT people will not know of it, creating huge problems for the company. Okay, let's imagine that we have an SOD matrix, and now we can actually employ it in order to develop a fraud check mechanism. So we have analyzed our business processes, we have analyzed the range of actions, we already have an idea of how they are run. So now we can develop a possible fraud scheme. So we understand how fraudulent activities are performed. We can actually break them down into specific business actions, transactions and roles that are maintained in the system. So we shall know exactly what kind of sequence of transactions can help a fraudster. Next, we need to realize and we need to learn who performed which particular action at what point in time. It can be difficult to automate, but if you have several reliable, good programmers, good software developers, and if you have good SAP analysts that will provide them with all the descriptions, there shouldn't be a problem. So I think that a mechanism like this can be relatively easily deployed. Well, by the way, we then shall be able to check who initiated this transaction, who employed this or that role. So this functionality will soon be available in Max Patrol as well. Let's look at the best practices now in terms of implementing GRC solutions. The key, obviously, practice, the key recommendation is to focus on prevention, not treatment. It is so much easier not to give critical rights to employees who don't deserve them than to investigate an actual violation or an actual fraudulent incident later. You should try automating as many controls as you can. Some solutions that exist there are manual, others are automated. Usually it's best if you can automate distribution of rights, if you can distribute access controls. And we see that many Russian companies are going in this direction. In conclusion, I'd like to point out that GRC is becoming a robust trend because vulnerabilities that have been kind of omnipresent in the infrastructure now can be controlled with a range of different tools. GRC is a higher level solution, if you like. And in order to deploy a GRC solution, you usually need more resources than usual. However, that certainly gives you an edge over competition through improved governance and minimized fraud. The most demanded GRC features today are critical actions control, access control, and fraud control. In my presentation, I've tried to show that you don't have to buy GRC solutions from well-known vendors. In many cases, it's best to try developing one yourself because a customized solution will better meet your needs, and chances are you will need to put less effort into developing and maintaining it. I'm done unless you have any questions, which people seem to have. I've got several questions. Well, you sort of persuaded us not to use SAP functionality. Why would you want to customize if SAP itself is customizable and very flexible? I'll try to answer your question. When I talked about development of a proprietary GRC solution, I said that the easiest thing to do was to manage transactions. Let me explain why. Looking at all authorization objects, looking at rows, searching for violations in a system that contains over several thousand users can be a major pain in the neck. It's much easier to manage by transactions. And when SAP is updated, they can update, for example, rows and transactions. Well, if you have a company employing 1,000 employees, probably you're not going to do it manually. And you also say that before you develop an SOD matrix, you need to look at how many admin users you have, but they will also be part of the SOD matrix, right? Well, an SOD matrix for business actions will not really show your admin stuff. And IT SOD will, certainly. Usually we differentiate between two types of SOD matrices, business and IT. I understand that SAP has this notion of a SAP emergency user. Why would you want to give additional privileges to your user and control this user all the time if you can just use this emergency user or use this star user role in case of an emergency? Indeed, SAP contains these mechanisms. One of them, for example, is a firefighter. However, they can be quite difficult to use, and many companies think twice about it. And you mentioned the substar thing. This was one of the examples, I understand. Unfortunately, I've been personally involved in something like this. We did pen testing based on social engineering with a company. So we sent a letter with an invalid archive that contained a Trojan. The manager who got the letter contained some very important instructions for the manager. The information sounded very urgent. He couldn't open the archive. So he essentially brought the file to the system administrator and he made him launch the archive on his machine as well. What I'm trying to tell you here is that in order to perform a given business process, users often have to find ways, and very often they demand extra rights. And IT people often just can't tell them no. Yeah, but if you have at least one person who's controlling everything, it can be a better regulated system. Well, you talked about fraud control. I think you meant fraud prevention. No, I think it's not prevention, but rather fraud identification. Yeah, but you look at logs to identify, right? And if you look at rights, you get a chance to prevent fraud, right? Well, SAP has got lots and lots of bypass tools. At 5 o'clock, Dmitry will make a presentation and he will talk more about it. The same functionality in SAP can be triggered with a multitude of different tools. So it can easily happen that this overlap exists and you don't realize it, because each of these roles individually seems perfectly innocent and okay, but it is their combination that becomes a nuclear bomb. You're right in your own respect, but I'm talking here about a potential for development of a customized GRC solution. Do you have other questions, please?
Вопрос следующий. У вас в самом начале был слайд, когда вы
Early on,
раскрывали GRC, говорили,
when you talked about GRC, you had a slide.
Указано три, сильно раньше, у вас там было три части слайда, первая часть стала
Oh, this one.
to save money. Каким образом, с вашей точки зрения, governance дает возможность именно создать...
How do you think governance helps companies make money? Well, this is really fundamental GRC terminology. You do know what governance is. Governance is when your top management spells out the mission and objectives of your company, like putting, I don't know, 1,000 tons of metal on the market. So this is an objective that will help the company move forward, say upgrade their production facilities or some such. And this is what I meant by saying that governance is about making money. Actually, I don't really understand how come having these objectives in itself plays into the GRC solution. Well, if we follow the usual methodology, we first look at the goals of the company, then we identify the risks that can bar us from delivering on these goals, and then we develop a range of measures that will alleviate, mitigate, eliminate these risks. And one of the tools we're using here is segregation of duties. There are other tools as well, such as risk management, access control, process control. A large GRC system can help you control lots and lots of different indicators, but many corporations just don't like the spend associated with it. Thank you. Anybody else has questions? And I understand that proprietary system is faster in development. Well, deployment for sure will take pretty much the same time. But you can argue that an off-the-shelf solution will probably take more effort, and after all, you can use, say, Excel spreadsheets, and you can run comparisons, and you know, the workload for your software developers will be minimal. However, in terms of managing and controlling this whole effort, you will need to expend more effort, simply because you need to make sure that your analysts are also involved. I should have also told you about maintenance. When your business actions change, you need to establish new roles, which means that you will probably need to redesign roles and you don't want to destroy your existing SOD metrics. So it can easily happen that developing an SOD metrics from scratch would be easier than maintaining it over time. I don't have an answer ready. She must have been asked about the price for it. I can tell you that a GRC solution for a 5,000 strong company will be around $2 million in Russia. This includes licenses, hardware, software, and integration services. And I've told you that integration deployment can take another 2 years, year or 2 years. And if you're not sure you really need it, I suggest you first develop your own proprietary solution. Then you'll have a better understanding of what exactly that is it exactly that you need. It's nearly impossible to hear what Javan said without the mic. We have loyal clients, and we're testing some of these tools with them now. I cannot really tell you about the speed of our solution, but I'll just tell you about the way we operate. We now employ automated or semi-automated role analysis. We try to minimize the manual labor involved. And I cannot give you a specific number here. I think that time required will be comparable to SAP GRC. Yeah, and SAP GRC also has many more other functions. Well, we are not claiming we shall be able to control all the parameters of the business process. We're only talking here about access control, SOD, role management, and role usage. This is in fact a major element of the system, and quite often this is all you need to assure a proper functioning of your system. Any other questions? Well, unfortunately, you're running out of time, but if you have other questions, you can certainly find me outside.